The Spin-off Podcast Network.
70,000 people are here, and Bob Dylan is the reason for it.
Inspired by the true story.
For anyone who's gonna hold your attention on a stage, you have to kind of be a freak.
Are you a freak?
Hope so.
And starring Timothée Chalamet as Bob Dylan. He defied everyone.
Turn it down!
Play loud!
To change everything.
Make some noise, BD.
Timothée Chalamet, Edward Norton, Elle Fanning, Monica Barbaro. A complete unknown. Only in theaters Christmas Day. Rated R. Under 17 and admitted without parent.
Imagine being the first person to ever send a payment over the internet. New things can be scary, and crypto is no different. It's new, but like the internet, it's also revolutionary. Making your first crypto trade feels easy with 24/7 support when you need it. Go to Kraken.com and see what crypto can be. Not investment advice. Crypto trading involves risk of loss. Cryptocurrency services are provided to U.S. and U.S. territory customers by Payward Ventures Inc. PVI DBA Kraken. Visit PVI's disclosures at kraken.com/legal/disclosures.
You're listening to Business is Boring, a podcast that reckons it's anything but. Business is Boring is brought to you by Spark Lab, offering inspiration and practical advice to help businesses find their edge. To hear more about Spark Lab, including details about the latest events, workshops, and business tools, visit sparklab.co.nz. And now, here's your host, Simon Pound.
Kia ora koutou katoa. Welcome to Business is Boring. AI is becoming more and more a part of daily life. But for many people, they've been using the product today's guest worked on for years. Tom Gruber is best known as the co-founder and creator of Siri, having co-founded and led the technology on Apple's intelligent assistant. But Tom's vision goes far beyond the functionality of voice commands. He's a pioneer in humanistic AI, the idea that artificial intelligence should amplify human potential, not replace it. Throughout his career, Tom has championed the use of AI to support creativity, understanding, and empathy. Today, he joins us to share insights into the future of AI, the importance of designing tech with a human-centered approach, and what it means to create technology that genuinely respects and enhances our lives. Tom is in town as part of the Spark Accelerate Summit, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for being here. I think with your voice, Simon, you could amplify human potential too.
Well, thank you. We're all trying to do our bit. Hey, so tell us, you've been at the front of AI since the very beginning. What drew you to the field?
Well, the beginning of AI is way before me.
Yeah. of modern application.
But it does seem like it's been 40 years. And it does seem like it was a good choice. I've always thought of as the coolest technology, even 40 years ago. And it's a dream come true to see a lot of our visions that we've been working on for decades really come to fruition now in this decade. And in fact, I think we're going to see in our lifetimes, the fulfillment of this idea of general purpose AI, where you really have a pretty omni-functional kind of AI that can do all kinds of things. And to imagine that was even possible outside of science fiction would have been impossible, really unimaginable 10, 20 years ago. And here it is.
It's remarkable, right? And what drew you into kind of the area with the potential and the like so much to be worked out and how it would happen. But you could kind of imagine a future where there were agents and all of these kind of elements, right?
Yeah. Well, I started out in psychology, actually. And understanding the human mind was my goal. And so the first bits of AI was really about trying to think how can I model the human mind. But then quickly I got into applications. I wanted to help augment humans. Because humans we're feeble. I mean, we make mistakes in every memory. Plus, we're limited. We're mortal, right? And why not help our own mortal, limited selves be better with the technology? And so that's where the very first project I did in AI was around helping someone who couldn't speak, use a computer to speak. And so essentially, I realize now I made a little LM, a little language model, to help predict what they were trying to say, so that they could do a little limited gesture like a click, and then it could generate a speech synthesized voice, and they could speak. So that meant to me a lot, because now I see AI doing something that enhances humanity inherently. And that's always drawn me in. I've always been on that side of AI, which is essentially how does AI make humans smarter?
Tell us about the project with Siri, as that is a little bit different, as far as I understand it, to the way large language models operate today. It was probably the first really big, wide application use of an intelligent assistant that touched the everyday person.
Oh yeah, it's definitely the first mainstream AI application. It was the fastest growing application of its time, and then ChatGPT became the next after it eclipsed it. It's funny. AI is an interest to the whole population, and it was a time where we didn't even have deep learning really at scale at that time. But what we have enough natural language understanding and technology, task orchestration. There's a bunch of other parts to an assistant that people don't know about. It's not just about language. And those were actually fairly mature then. And the one thing that wasn't quite ready but was almost ready was speech recognition. That was a statistical, data-driven process today. It uses new technology today. But we saw that the Siri team, part of the expertise of the team was predicting that in a few years, that technology was going to be good enough once we give it enough user data. And sure enough, that happened. By the time we released an app where we had a product that was competent enough to do basic voice commands for a consumer application. And that was really fun back in the early days, because we got to realize the vision that a lot of AI people have had for decades, which is this AI assistant thing, but do it on this new device, this new iPhone, this new mobile computing platform that is the perfect match for it.
What was it like to build something like that in Apple? Kind of a company that's famously perfectionist, when you're dealing with absolute edge technology that's still being built to be good enough for widespread use while you're building it.
And that's an insightful question, Simon, because, it was a startup, first of all, that built it. We were independent for 2 years. And as soon as we launched it, a few weeks later, Steve Jobs gave us a call, and we started working with the team there. Now, working with Apple is quite amazing. I think Siri succeeded there mainly because Steve Jobs was there to help us. He was alive for the last year, and he died the day after Siri launched, actually. And so he was there to say to the team, help these people out. And so that put the alignment of that giant company behind us, so that we were basically built into the operating system. How else would you do that? You need the help of everybody. And so that was a part of it. It was very fun. But as you say, it was a new technology for them. They weren't terribly best in the game at server-side stuff. They were mainly about client-side things, and they also weren't really used to things that don't always have a predictable answer, statistical kind of things. So it was a cultural change. We had to teach the culture of probabilistic response. And even in the user interface, how do you design a user interface that's accepting of the occasional hiccup? So it's a good question, because that's part of any startup that goes into a large company. There's a cultural norm mismatch usually. And how they resolve that mismatch is going to be determining how they succeed.
How was it for you, having started the startup and developed this technology, to get a phone call from, the world's greatest, most public technologist and be asked to be integrated into something as kind of defining of the technical moment as the iPhone?
Oh, it was really a dream for us. I mean, we had to make a decision. It was a hard decision, because all of our investors wanted us to keep going independently, because we had a pretty lucrative business underhand here. But we wanted to change the world. And it's very hard to say no to someone like Steve Jobs saying, hey, you can join business with me. I will do the money part. I'll do the business part. You make the product. And then we'll succeed together. And you can't get that. You can't get anything better. If you're a designer of products, that's what you dream for.
There's that lovely idea that, any sufficiently advanced technology is like magic. And I think Siri was, in the best applications of it when it launched, kind of the touch of magic that the iPhone especially, you could see the apps were going to be amazing and the like, but that kind of touch of magic in there. How did you go about planning to create that user experience? and thinking about the best use cases as the way, and please help me understand this more, but the way I understand it, you had to do a lot of thinking about what would be asked and actually plan in the responses rather than the approach that the very large language models allow you to do today, which is not as pre-planned, right?
That's true. That's true. Well, there's actually a couple of cool directions to take that question. One is the business of magic itself. It turns out that my co-founder of Siri, Adam Chire, is a world-class magician. And I'm not exaggerating. He literally hangs out with some of the top guys, and he's done a run at the Magic Castle and so on. He's a real pro magician. He understood the power of preparing for the act. So when and I was in charge of the user experience, and we had to figure out what we called graceful degradation. What do you do when they say something that it doesn't understand? So between his instincts for how do you create an experience, well, a magician always knows what card you're going to draw before you draw it. They understand the human psychology of the audience, and that's partly how they do the magic. And so we had to take that same stance is what do you think they're going to say on the stage at Wall Street Journal's conference when they're asking a question? Well, Kara Swisher they're going to ask, what about Kara? And of course, that was one of the questions they asked.
Yeah, great.
And things like this. So magic is indistinguishable from technology, but also when you're talking about demos to investors, they're also magic tricks. They're not fraudulent, but they're magic tricks. They say, please pay attention to this aspect of our vision and don't ignore this part.
I love that. And that idea of really understanding from psychology and from thinking about the UX and the people in it. Tell us about how that informs your views about what you've called humanistic AI.
Yeah, well, humanistic AI is really just a choice about what to do, how to choose which projects to do, what to invest in, what to do with AI, because it has that potential to do so many things with AI. And so I had to make a cut, how do I decide? And the humanistic AI's point of view is, well, there's this distinction between making machine learning itself or machine intelligence itself be the goal, which is a perfectly fine thing, and you would celebrate success for hey, it beat the top Go player in the world, say. Or making human capacity or human empowerment be the goal. And that sounds squishy, but that means just helping us do things we already want to do and just do them better with AI. And that's humanistic. And so it's not they're both possible, and people do both of them fine. For instance, if I'm going to build a robot on a factory floor, I don't want any humans there. It's dangerous. I want only machines, and I want to optimize what they do. But if I want to build, an AI that helps people with medical care or something, I want it to be in service of a thing that doctors and nurses and everyone are trying to do right now. The goal isn't to replace nursing, it's to augment their jobs so that they can do a better job at patient care. So that's humanistic. And it actually really helps, because if you have that, say there could be 1,000 AI companies out there, and if you want to work for one of them and you're a top engineer, you're going to choose one that's going to make you money, have a great impact, and also, hey, you're going to feel good about yourself getting up in the morning. You're part of something that means something. For maybe your grandmother can use it, or maybe it's going to help thousands of people. And that's another benefit of taking the ethical choice towards humanistic AI.
A big theme, and we'll dig into that humanistic a little bit more when we come to talk about what you're here in New Zealand for. A big theme of your work seems to be the intertwining of the entrepreneurial and the technical and the end state for users in the world. Tell us about that kind of entrepreneurial side of things. How important is it that you were your own startup developing Siri on your own speed before going into Apple and with the other projects that you've been part of?
Well, the startup is a great vehicle for improving the products of the world. The large corporations are largely not, for various reasons, incentive and other things, not interested in really changing what they do. They've been successful at building what they build. It's called the innovator's dilemma, and they're just not going to do it. But in Silicon Valley, there's been this tradition that VCs will fund, say, 10 startups, one or two of them will succeed, and that will be bought by another company that will in fact be able to distribute it and change the world. That model works when it works because the startup culture is about taking some risks, but mainly taking on problems that are underserved by the mainstream enterprise. And you see that all over the place. Now, Siri was clearly a deep tech problem. And so there were companies, Microsoft, everyone was working on something like that, but we were able to put together a team that was tight and fast and aimed, laser focused, as they say, on what we're trying to build and raise just enough money to get the job done and go fast. And that's fun to work in a company like that. And then you can you can take on tasks that are bigger than you can imagine. I mean, there were 24 people in the Siri company. We built the Siri product with 24 people in 2 years. And most enterprises would be like, that would be 100 times too small for something that has 500 million users. So, but you can do it because it's software, right?
It's wild and so cool. And like a link to another great entrepreneurial enterprise that looks so interesting. Can you tell me about your work with LifeScore?
Yeah, LifeScore is a fun project. It's sort of AI and music, but from the beginning, when we were on stage at Abbey Road Studios, they were an incubator for us. We were telling the world, even from the beginning, we know this stuff is coming where it's going to want to automate music. We don't want to do that. We're going to say this is going to be a thing that augments human musical talent, because we know that there's, first of all, it's a dumb thing to automate something that people love doing, and there's plenty of people doing it. So that's just like, why would you ever automate musicians? But what LifeScore was about was making it so that we could make music that's technically mediated, the computer's involved in the composition of the music, and it can therefore make things like a sleep music that goes for 8 hours, that puts you to sleep, even though the original notes were written by humans in little pieces. And so we found a lot of, it was really a joy project because we could have there were more composers and musicians than engineers in that company. We could have a high creativity level in the team, and we could do a lot with a small amount of tech, but also everyone was aligned around this mission. Like, let's make money, make a startup that does something new, but let's not automate away the jobs of our peers and our friends.
And that theme of kind of augmenting human productivity and creativity in LifeScore seems really interesting, as so often, you'll have like a little phrase or a little idea, and then you want to build it out. And that seems to be a beautiful application for AI augmentation. Tell us about are there similarities between the way that you think about music and the way you think about AI, or the mathematical principles that seem to go between both?
Well, I mean, music has always been, it's an abstract thing. It's an abstract form. But mostly it hasn't been automated. There hasn't been much work in that space. And it actually wasn't so much the math, but when I met the co-founder of LifeScore, Philip Shepard, he's a professional composer. He's got 60 projects under his belt. I said, well, do you know how you do composition? He goes, yeah, it's a system. I know how to do it. I can teach people. I can do it repeatedly. Oh, well, then you can make a computer program that helps with that. And so there's nothing, it doesn't mean it has to be magical and mystical. It just means we have to understand how it works. But the key insight was, you don't automate the creative spark. You automate the mechanical piece. So for instance, if you're going to write a piece for a long 90-minute movie, you write the theme. That theme might take weeks to write, but it's a creative thing. And once you get the theme written, then you might reuse the theme hundreds of times throughout the piece. Well, the reusing is kind of the thing that's technically mediated, but the original theme you have to have a human do, or we prefer to have a human do. But the back and forth is, again, it's almost like a fun thing. Like, you do it because it's fun and it's right, in a sense. Because why would we take away the joy of the creative piece of the product just because we can,
Do you see this as a way to kind of increase the surface area of creativity? Like, if I think of creativity, it's kind of like, as a person, you can kind of draw on what you've experienced or things that you smash together from your own libraries of things you know.
Yeah.
While AI-backed products, they're able to draw from limitless libraries and even smash things together in ways that we might never think about, right? And so with music and that idea of the theme, you could say, give me some kind of variation on this theme in 100 ways I might not have thought of. And who knows what magic you might kind of uncover.
That's very true. I mean, that's one of the two uses that people use right now. We've already discovered two really good use cases for creativity in AI, especially generative AI. One of them is exactly that. Just give me some ideas. I call it the blank page problem. You're sitting on a white piece of paper. What am I going to write? And a lot of people find creatives that are excellent have that phase. How do I get started? And so, and then in music, we don't usually do it that way. It's usually we actually have the idea, but we use it in a later stage, the production, more like you said, like applying it. But it's interesting that way. The other one is, like you said, maybe riffing on a thing you have. So, for instance, when I was working on this talk, I actually gave a draft of the abstract to an AI assistant. And I said, actually a draft of a couple of paragraphs of the speech. And I said, I also gave it about, about 2 or 3 hours of my previous talks. I said, this is my style of writing and speaking. In my style, please tell me how you would criticize this piece. And it came back with a bunch of criticism, most of which are just based on I didn't understand what I was trying to say, but a couple of things were like, okay, that's interesting, And then I could, and so there's ways of using it that way, just sort of as a partner, like you might ask your friend, your spouse, or your assistant for just advice. Just give me feedback. It goes even deeper than that, though. So in the case of the modality of writing, I like writing, and I would only really ask for assistance in terms of criticism. I wouldn't say write it for me. But in the case of visuals, my art is photography, not painting. So I know it when I see it, but I don't know how to create it. Or I can't create it on the craft. Well, with generative AI, now I can. So in this talk, we're talking about Spark Accelerate this week. Going through it, it was 50 or 60 slides, and the images, almost every image in there is a full screen, photorealistic idea rendered visually that I would never be able to do myself. And in some cases, the idea, the very visual metaphor that we ended up landing on was not in our heads at the beginning of the thing. It was like conversation. What about this? What about this? What about this? And that conversation about a visual thing is time-consuming. Normally, you would do that if you had the luxury of paying a designer. You might have 2 or 3 meetings with them over on a project, and lots of money and time later, and they're sketching and and then maybe you get a thing that's for maybe one image. But to do it for dozens of images now it's possible. And so there's a case where that kind of AI does draw on the work of many people. So that's the tricky thing about it, is the business model. I'm wandering to a new area, but the business model for that isn't settled yet. They're not being compensated, all those other artists yet. So it's ethically problematic right now. But it is creatively helpful. So you can use the collective influence of the entire artistic community, which you've always been able to do by just going to art school, say. But now you can do it in a precise and exhaustive way using an AI model. But you use it not to copy them, but to generate something new. So it's an interesting ethical quandary there.
Yeah, love that. And let's come back in a moment to talk about the ethics of AI production, creativity, and what's happening at Spark Accelerate. Spark is proud to partner with the Sustainable Business Network and the Climate Action Toolbox. The free Climate Action Toolbox can provide you with simple step-by-step guides to measure and reduce your emissions. Help lead the way to a low-carbon future for New Zealand. Visit sparklab.co.nz/sustainability to find out more.
Imagine being the first person to ever send a payment over the internet. New things can be scary, and crypto is no different. It's new, but like the internet, it's also revolutionary. Making your first crypto trade feels easy with 24/7 support when you need it. Go to kraken.com and see what crypto can be. Not investment advice. Crypto trading involves risk of loss. Cryptocurrency services are provided to U.S. and U.S. territory customers by Payward Ventures Inc. PVI DBA Kraken. Visit PVI's disclosures at kraken.com/legal/disclosures.
This episode is brought to you by Amazon. The holidays are here, and you know what that means? It's time to get your friends and family the gifts they deserve. Take the stress out of shopping with Amazon's great deals and low prices on a huge range of items from toys to tech and much more. Whoever you're gifting for, Amazon has great prices on everything you need this holiday season. Shop Amazon for all your gifting needs.
Hoki mai anō, welcome back to Business is Boring. So yeah, you pick up on such an interesting point about the ethics of AI production there. But you also make the point so well that I think all idea systems have been based on what's gone before and then building on and drawing from. And now it's just available at scale and with kind of, everything in there rather than just what you've been lucky enough to have been exposed to, right? How were you thinking about that in terms of the ethics of the projects that you're involved in?
Yeah. Well, in the case of music, I'm still holding out hope that it's a special case compared to the other generative AI worlds. Music has always been about intellectual property. Anybody who makes business, the music business has always been about that. And we've seen it go through these stages like the Napster thing where it turned into Spotify, which didn't really help a lot. It didn't kill the music industry. It didn't totally make everyone rich. But the interesting thing is it was an adaptation to technology. It could have gone to where no musician could ever make a living ever again if there was no intellectual property, right? So I'm on the side of let's hold on to intellectual property in the case of music because you can actually see direct influence, where, this music is really a remix of that music. And there's a bunch of legal precedent and everything to say that's the right thing to do in music. And by the way, there's even technology to know, even with a language model or with a whole big diffusing model, rather, an AI model, you can still, if you do it right, figure out kind of who the influencers were. Now, in the case of something like an LLM that's trained on, basically all the text that's worth reading on the internet, it's a little different because that text, even though a lot of it is copyrighted, it's essentially, there's an argument for fair use there. It's only in the case where the generative AI is literally like publishing a thing that was behind a paywall that shouldn't be revealed, but it's just because it was trained on it, it's revealing essentially the content. And this is the essence of the New York Times case against OpenAI. That's a strong argument, I think, that's not fair use anymore, right?
Or if the prompt perhaps brings that in, give this to me in the style of the Avengers, then obviously you've got some bells ringing on the prompt side.
Exactly. Yeah, no, that's right. No, you can clearly, there are clearly bright lines in ethical use of generative AI like that. And so I think we're going to work it out as a culture. We're going to figure out the norms. Like we worked it out with Napster. It wasn't a great solution, but there's still a music business, right? So I think we're going to get there with creative. I think the more interesting thing is my experience in doing both written and visual generative AI is that in the case of written, I only used it critical. In the case of visual, I used it generatively. Well, I am seeing a new role for the designers and me. And so I can use Photoshop, but I'm not that good. And when I really need a real expert, I hire my friend. So he doesn't even use Photoshop anymore. He only uses generative AI, which is kind of amazing. What's happened in the conversation he has with his clients is that now the conversation is about brand strategy and like on-brand visuals, style, and so on. It's about the high-level things that a marketing service firm delivers to a client, and the actual pixels are just incidental. And we see that with even like software engineering, where the line is moving from a coder is a guy who can tolerate like this horrible, tedious thing you have to do to make a program work, into maybe she's actually a specification writer, a careful thinker who can say exactly what the program should do, and understand the client's problem. That's the skill of software engineering in the future, with AI doing the low-level stuff.
100%, right? Like if you're an expert in some kind of archaic programming language and you make your money because no one else can fix the thing you can fix, you're dead, because AI will be able to do that. But if you're an amazing problem solver who can stitch together multiple services to solve a problem for the world, you're just going to be kind of 10x'd in your ability to do things, right?
Yeah, that's right. And in fact, even that sort of high water mark is going to come up higher. It's going to rise a bunch of boats because you and I may not program anymore if you used to. I don't anymore. It's just too much time. And I don't want to pay someone to do a simple like spreadsheet model or something. But now we can use AI to write these codes for us, non-programmers, to do tasks for us that we would normally just not do because it's too much trouble or too much money or something, right? So I think we're going to see that also in all these various services where it brings to the consumer. A good example is like what happened with Instagram. Well, Instagram basically brought to a absolute mainstream consumer state-of-the-art filters that professional artists would use in Photoshop and these kind of companies. Well, it's amazing, right? They also cut the money out from you. No one's going to pay for that high-end thing. But now we have millions of users doing really creative things with their photos on Instagram, and the world's kind of better for it. At least visually. I don't know about the rest.
Absolutely. And, that's been a real theme of your work as well, is this keeping the human at the center, but also having that kind of positivity. And I think, we're at such a moment of, epochal kind of technological change at the moment. And it's kind of fair that people are concerned and worried about these things. But it does feel to me that there is a lot of exciting potential with all of this, right? Like, how are you thinking about it in terms of, like the upsides that come out of Instagram or Spotify?
Yeah, well, I'm simultaneously terrified and very excited. We'll leave the terrified side. It would be positive for now. But it is interesting that what we see with AI is the most powerful technology in our lifetimes. According to the head of Google, it's the most powerful technology since the invention of fire, which was so important it actually changed our own anatomy in our brain. Okay, this is a big deal to be compared to fire. And it's so important partly because it does so many possible different things, okay? Well, one of the properties that makes this really exciting is that it is just bits. It's immaterial. It's not physical. There's no zero-sum game. So once you create an AI that's amazing, you can give it to everyone in the world. And by the way, you could give it to them on their phone in a language interface. That means you can be technically illiterate and living in the middle of nowhere, and you can still use the state-of-the-art AI on your phone. So that means that we can now start addressing global problems that are underserved today because of the physicality of the problem. Healthcare to the third world, especially mental health care. World Health Organization says that 1 billion people are in serious need of mental health care. There's never going to be enough therapists in the world to do this. But for those situations that can do conversational therapy over AI, it's now possible. Education. Imagine that every kid in the entire world had a personal intelligent tutor. And tutors like that have been proven to raise their ability at least a sigma or two, at least a standard deviation or two, which means that you could raise the entire curve of all performance of learners in the entire world in just a few years. This has never been possible before. And it's because of the nature of this technology.
Yeah, and like the connections now that language and opportunity barriers can be bridged by this, and the access where people who have talent and ability may never have been able to participate, right?
That's right, yeah. In fact, it's one of my things I expect to be speaking about in Spark Accelerate this week is that, people want to know, what can I do as a New Zealand business person? Well, this is a gorgeous country. People would die to live here. People want to live here. They just need a way of working. Right? Well, of course, we know since COVID, it's possible to work remotely, and AI is perfect for enabling that. So, there are, like my LifeScore, for instance, has no office. It has no headquarters. It's based on 5 or 6 different countries. And yet we are able to function perfectly well as a team. So making that the norm and being world-class at working collaboratively over online, using IT and infrastructure, of course, but also, maybe in the future, AI is going to serve as a teammate that might be able to bridge, for instance, time zone differences. So one of the challenges is that you might have a team that's 12 hours ahead of another team, and you can't be having real-time phone calls and Zooms with them. But the AI can harvest what was done in the shift before, so to speak, summarize for you, possibly line up actions and responses needed, and then you can do work on that, and then you can transfer that to the next shift. That kind of agility, working around the clock, makes it possible for folks, that want to live in a beautiful place to participate in a world-class team with the top talent in London, New York, California, whatever.
Yeah, that's so fun, so interesting to be a temporal bridge in the way that, we're getting used to the translating bridge. Like it's now become commonplace that you just have this magic in your hands that means that you can read or communicate with anyone anywhere you go. When, a very, very short time ago, that was incredibly complex as a problem. And now it's playing with time. Tell us a little bit more about the kind of approach that you're taking with your keynote at the Spark Accelerate Summit.
Well, this is going to be fun. It's a real privilege to speak to the business leaders here. Like I said, I love this country. It's a beautiful place. And they have a real potential here. They really want to reach and they want to be part of the AI scene. And I understand that they're not California where billions of dollars are being thrown at a few lucky individuals to build these. But you know what? You don't need to be that anymore. Because there's going to be enough of those companies that are super well funded to create what's called foundation models. So part of my message is you can start businesses or you can adapt businesses you have and build on the shoulders of those giants no matter where you live. Because, the things that you do, the things we're doing as a podcast, this is universal technology everywhere in the world. It doesn't matter that the microphones are made in Germany and the coffee's made in whatever. It's like, you don't need to be special. And it used to be even the reason to have a corporation is no longer there. Even the concentration of capital and raw materials and access to markets is no longer localized. So the world really is flat that way. And it's a great time to be in business.
And that helps little countries like New Zealand more than others because there's no other way that we could get the capital base or the infrastructure if we had to compete on who is providing the foundational models. But if it is just what are the good ideas, talent is pretty evenly distributed. Yeah. Ideas are pretty evenly distributed, but resources definitely are not.
That's right, yeah. In fact, ever since the web, really, we've had this business where everyone has the same stimulus, and that's why you see so many copycats. Everyone comes up with the same idea at the same time. And it's really the execution that differentiates these small companies and their success. So I think that's part of the message too. Like, how do we get on the world-class learning curve of executing in a virtual distributed team, using AI, embracing it now because it's coming fast, but not just like in a sloppy way, but ethically thinking through what are we going to do with it. And it is an exciting time. I think we've got the potential here to do so much good if we choose well. Also, by the way, New Zealand's had relatively enlightened leadership, I might say, government leadership over the past few years. The rest of the world notices. That's impressive. It also attracts talent here. And it also makes an environment where businesses can operate under an assumption that their property rights are maintained, that their employees will be taken care of, things like that, which creates kind of a win-win for society and business together.
Love it. And as a final kind of thought, what will success be in your work as, the impact and influence and the number of people who have been touched by your work and have used it? It's kind of remarkable, right? Like, and how do you think about success and impact in that world?
Well, I'm really lucky. I have been on an exponential curve for impact in my career, and it was because I was chasing impact. I really would measure myself. So when I was researching, when I made my PhD, I had impacts. My first programs had impacts on dozens of people, and then I worked at Stanford, and I was trying to get to a larger audience. But funny thing, we went from our first really smart program we wrote under this DARPA contract. We had like 5 or 6 users because those were the DARPA contractor people who watched it. We put it on the web when the web was just invented. We built a way of putting it on the web, and next week we had 30,000 users. And it was like, ding, oh, that's interesting. And so the next company was about collective intelligence, and we kept moving from there. And each time we added 0 or 2 to the number of humans that are touched by it. So that's how I measure my success. Well, Siri's used 1 billion times a day. It's not, it's not the most used program in the world, but I'm happy with how it's used. I wish it would have more features, et cetera, but I think it's been a good run. At this phase, though, there's a bigger story here. And I was alluding to it before when I was saying that AI is can do anything. So there are underserved problems for humanity that need to be solved now. We all know about climate change, of course, but things like education, mental health care, and so on, they're massively underserved. And so if I can be part of the conversation to help steer the opportunity cost or opportunity choice, let's in other words, hey, folks, let's invest in education in AI this way because it has this potential for an impact. Or, hey, folks, let's think of these ways of hooking computers to machines to help people do mental health care better. I would measure that as impact, whether it's directly from me. It doesn't matter whether it's me alone anymore. It's just like, can we make it so that our community, AI community, is solving world problems? And I'll tell you, my hero in this space is Demis Hassabis. Now, he's the head of Google's DeepMind in London. And they were the best AI lab in the world. And he and Mustafa Suleyman, who went to Microsoft, are like the top people in that group, in that area. They were explicit from the beginning that they were going to be ethically choosing to both take care of their corporate owners, Google, but also take care of humanity. And Demis just won the Nobel Prize for their work because he dedicated a special team in his company to solving an important problem in biology. And they nailed a problem. They basically solved the protein folding problem for all of biology. And they decoded all the problems that people had. I mean, it's an unbelievable gift to humanity. They just gave it away. And then he's doing it again in material science. They just went and discovered, tens of thousands of new materials that might be used for superconducting electricity or battery storage. This is the kind of role model I have for impact. And I applaud Demis, and folks like to aspire to be like him.
I love that. And thank you so much for sharing some of your stories so far today and your work. It's been such a pleasure to chat.
A real pleasure to be here. Thanks, Simon.
Thank you so much to Tom Gruber for sharing with us. Thank you to you for having us along in your ears and listening, and to everyone who helps make this happen, like our producer, Te Ahe Butler. If you do like what we do, please do rate and leave a review. It really does help. E noho rā.
From the Spin-Off Podcast Network, that was Business is Boring, brought to you by SparkLab. Make sure you're following Business is Boring wherever you get your podcasts. And for more information on SparkLab, visit sparklab.co.nz.
Does your brand have something important to say through meaningful messaging that reaches the right audience? At The Spin-Off, we work closely with our partners to create bespoke campaigns that bring value to both your brand and our audience. If you're interested in learning more about partnering with us, email Beck, that's BEC, at thespinoff.co.nz.
Hi, I'm Anna Rafferty-Connell, Senior Writer at The Spin-Off. Join me and special guests Emma Wehipehana and Hayden Donnell live on stage at Q Theatre in Auckland on December 11 as we review the year. For a night of easy laughs and some razor-sharp takes, book tickets at thespinoff.co.nz/events.
The Spin-Off Podcast Network.